There is a tomb built in colonial India where European Gothic wasn't imposed by the British. It was chosen by the locals themselves. The Mahabat Maqbara in the city of Junagadh looks a little bit like Paris in Gujarat. Why would a local ruler make this choice? In colonial architecture, hybridity, the mixing of European and local styles, was a standard tool of imperial control. But here's what makes this case extraordinary. The Mahabat Maqbara wasn't imposed by colonizers. It was commissioned by local rulers who actively chose to blend Gothic elements with their own Islamic traditions. This completely flips the usual power dynamic. Instead of Europeans forcing their aesthetics on locals, we see Indian nobility voluntarily adopting European styles alongside their own. Why would they do this? In India, in the center of the state of Gujarat, there is the city of Junagadh, the former capital of the princely state of Junagadh. The Afghan Babi dynasty was at the head of the state from 1730 to 1948. The dynasty eventually came under the control of the British Empire, but in keeping with the tradition of British governance, it lost only control over foreign policy and trade. Domestic policy remained sovereign, including urban planning. Right in the center of the city, at the end of the second half of the 19th century, the Mahabat Maqbara complex was built. Its distinctive feature is the mix of Indo-Islamic and European Gothic style. This is clearly visible from its Gothic columns, as you can see. And what is especially important here is the usage of not only the British-European style, which we could see in other public buildings throughout India, but also other, such as French and Italian motifs. We can see Gothic spiral staircases on minarets, French-style tall glass windows, and abundant use of floral ornamentation, in which it is sometimes difficult to distinguish between Indian and European motifs. Of course, the basis of the building is Mughal architecture, or in other words, Indo-Islamic. The dome, the minarets, and even the traditional Indian jali screens. But it still looks even more Gothic than those examples that the British Empire itself built in India. How did that happen? This building was not built by Europeans. It was built strictly by order of the Nawab, that is, the ruler of the state, Mahabat Khan II. And it was designed by a local architect, Sheikh Bahauddin Hussain Bar. The complex contains both the tomb of the Nawab himself and the tomb of his architect, both in similar styles. Hybridity in colonial architecture is usually used to establish the power of the colonizer, to show his presence and at the same time to associate him with the local population. Often this is a conscious decision. Thus, the British used the Indian Islamic style together with the Gothic in India, a style that we can call Indo-Gothic or Indo-Saracenic. Researchers often frame this within the opposition between colonizer and colony, as if hybridity always represents the colonizer taking local culture for political purposes. In my previous analysis of Soviet Central Asian architecture and Malaysian colonial buildings linked in the description, we saw this classic colonizer-imposed pattern. But this model doesn't explain every case. Where the British in India or the French in Vietnam, for example, used a hybridity as a tool to demonstrate power, dynasties like the Babi used a hybridity as an indicator of the dynasty's modernity, an indicator that power was keeping up with the times. Eventually, European style became fashionable in the colonies and was used even without being imposed from above. This case shows us that colonial cultural exchange wasn't a one-way street. When we study hybrid architecture, we need to ask not only who imposed this style, but who chose it and why. The Mahabat Maqbara proves that local agency existed even within colonial power structures. This is an unpopular fact, but you cannot look at the process of colonization too unequivocally, at least in the cultural sphere. This does not justify the process of colonization itself, especially from the economic and social side. But such examples helps us better understand the processes of intercultural relationships, even when these relationships are hierarchical. In the next video on this topic, I will consider an example from Nepal, where there was no European power at all, but European-style buildings appeared. Why is that? Subscribe and wait for the next video. Do not forget to like this one also, and if you want to support me, the link to Patreon will be in the description. Goodbye.